Hello, this is Les Bennett, Learning and Development Manager with the Stewart Restaurant Group. In today's video, I want to talk about the E84 error code that we find on our velocity fryers. Now, when we deal with the E84 error code, we're dealing with the pressure pin switch found within our lid. So what does the pressure pin switch do? When the fryer's under pressure, it locks the lid, and when the fryer's not under pressure, it unlocks the lid. So in today's video, I want to do a walkthrough just explaining how the system works, and then we can do some troubleshooting for when you find an E84C or an E84D error code on your fryer. So the tools we'll need for this project. At the minimum, we're going to want a Phillips head screwdriver, and that'll be to take the cover off the top of the lid. If you want to do a deeper dive into the troubleshooting, a voltmeter comes in handy. Now, if you don't have one or don't know how to work one, that's fine. We can do a lot of troubleshooting without one. And then finally, if we do have to replace something, it's usually this pressure pin switch right here. But at the minimum, Phillips head screwdriver will get us started in this process of trying to do the troubleshooting for the E84C and the E84D error code. Now to begin, I'm going to want to remove my lid cover from the lid. And to do that, there's just two screws I need to remove. And they're going to be on the very edges of the back of the lid. You don't need to worry about the two in the middle, just get the ones on the edges. A good tip for doing this is to have a screwdriver with a magnetic tip on the end, because sometimes you'll drop these screws. There'll be a lot of grease in here. So if you can just use a magnetic screwdriver, you should be able to take these off. And then once we get those off, we can take the lid off. All right, now that I've removed the two screws from the back, the top of the lid should pop open. And if I need to, these are held in by some pegs at the very front. I can just stick my screwdriver kind of in here, and I can pop them off. Then this should be able to come right off. So how does my lid actually lock? Well, if I open up my control panel, I have a port right here, and these wires actually connect to my lid lock. And if I follow them around to the left side of my fryer, there's a harness here, and there's a harness here, and then they connect right there to my upper lid lock. Now, when the fryer's not being used, when it's not under pressure, these wires have continuity, or it's a closed loop. In other words, if voltage was applied, it would come out through the wire, it would come up, it would go all the way through my switch here, come out the other side, and it would come back. It's a closed circuit. So whenever there's a closed circuit, the fryer or the control panel knows it's not under pressure. Now, what's going to happen when we cook chicken, there's actually a hollow space within this lid, and there's a lower lid lock. And the lower lid locking mechanism's actually within the hollow space in here. It's not a part we can replace, but it's what actually locks the lid. So if I have my lid down, what's going to happen is, as the fryer builds up pressure, the pressure is going to push on the bottom side of the lid, and it's going to push on that lower lid locking pin that's inside the lid. And as that lid locking pin lifts up, that will actually lock it. Now, how does the fryer know? How does the control panel know that the lid is actually locked, though? Well, as that lower pin in there comes up and locks, it's actually going to push up on this upper lid locking pin right here. You can hear it click. So as the lower pin inside the lid, inside of here, pushes up, it's going to push up on this. And when that happens, it actually opens the circuit, or it cuts the circuit, so that way the current can no longer flow back to the computer. So when the computer's not getting a signal back, it now at this point thinks it's under pressure. So that's how things work in a normal situation. Now let's discuss the E84C and the E84D error code. Now with the E84C error code, what's going to happen is you put down a rounded chicken, you close the lid, and immediately the fryer starts to build pressure. Now, once the computer detects that the fryer is at about 3 psi, it expects the lid to be closed. It expects the pin to come up, it expects the line to be opened up so the current can't flow, and that the lid is locked. So what's going to happen is, if it cannot detect that, even if the lid is actually locked, if the computer doesn't think it's locked, it's going to flash the E84C error code, which immediately then, it's going to open up your solenoid back here and let all your steam out, because it's a safety precaution. Obviously, if the fryer is under pressure, the lid needs to be locked. Now, the E84D error code is on the opposite end of the spectrum, where the fryer is not under pressure, but for some reason the computer thinks it's under pressure. So it's on the opposite end of the spectrum, and the E84D error code is probably the most common one we have, where it thinks that the switch in here is in a locked position. So let's do some troubleshooting on how we can resolve both of the E84C and the E84D error code. Now, in a very, very rare situation, the actual lid lock and pin inside of the lid here, inside the hollow cavity, could go out. It's very rare. The way you can test that is when you cook around a chicken, you can have this lid off, the top cover off here, and when you put the chicken down, you should immediately see this pin rise up and these springs compress. And then when the cook cycle's done, you'll see them slowly start to decompress. So as long as these are coming up and compressing and decompressing, I know that the lid lock and pin underneath there is pressing up on them. Now, in rare cases, we have seen this go out. And the reason why it would most likely go out is because your slides here have come off and this entire cavity here has gotten full of grease, and grease has gotten down into these ports, which has gotten into the hollow cavity. So what happens is, as pressure is building up on the bottom of the lid, that lid is pushing up and it's displacing the air. The air is coming out through these ports. But grease can get down in here, and over time, it can get into the mechanism which is down inside the lid. But that's a very rare case. So again, to test it, just make sure when your chicken goes down that this lifts up, and then at the end of the cycle, this comes down. Then you know that the pin inside here is fine. Now as I begin to troubleshoot, and I got my cover off here, assuming I don't have a voltmeter and all I have is a Phillips screwdriver, the very first and most obvious things I'm going to look for, especially if I have an E84D error code, is I have to make sure that all my connections are good. I have opened up lids and I've found these disconnected, so we want to make sure these are connected. None of the wires have come out. You can even go over here and check this one. If you needed to take the side panel off, I've seen it times where this one just wasn't tight enough. And also check my connection back here. So with the E84D error code, the obvious first thing is just to make sure nothing has come disconnected. Now if that doesn't work, I want to look at this switch right here itself. Because I can have if I have an E84C error code or even the E84D error code, this switch can be going bad. So what's happening is the pin inside here is fine. It's pressing up on this, but it's not opening or closing the line in here. The part has gone bad. So if I don't have a voltmeter, how do I test this? It's actually very simple. I'm going to go out in the kitchen right here now, and I'll show you how to do it. So now in order to test if this part is good or bad without a voltmeter, all I have to do is I go to my computer, I go to info mode, and I'm going to scroll over to input 2. Right now it says my pressure pin lid is okay. In other words, it's not under pressure. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to lift up on this. And watch what happens when I lift up on it. It now thinks it's under pressure because I've simulated it being under pressure by lifting that up. I drop it back down, it goes to okay, and every time I lift it up, it goes to pressure. I know the pin is good if I lift it up and it goes to pressure. Now, if I lifted up this pin and that just kept saying okay, or it just kept saying pressure and it would never change back and forth between okay and pressure, I then would know something's wrong with my pin here and I'd want to replace it. Now you can also test this component with a voltmeter. And what I've done is I put my leads on the two outer terminals and I'm showing continuity, but as soon as I lift up on the spring, it should go to open line, which it did. So got continuity. Now if it goes under pressure, it's an open line. That's one way to test that. If it was staying open the whole time, or if it wasn't opening it at all when I lift up on the pin, I would know that there's also issues with the switch. Now let's look at another way to test continuity. Now the next thing I might do, if my upper pressure pin is checking out okay, all my connections seem to be fine, but for some reason I'm still getting that E84D error code. I want to check now to make sure there's no short in any of my lines. And what I did is I'm going to put my voltmeter on continuity. I'm going to put one of the leads into one of these wires. If I followed the wire back, it's going to come up back here, and when I test it, I should no longer have an open line, which I don't, which shows me that that whole line is good. If I still had an open line, I would know I have an issue and there's a short somewhere in there. Now, and then what I can do is I can also then switch this one over into there. Then I think that one is probably the yellow wire. I can check it. And I'm checking just to make sure there's no open lines. Now, if I do find that I have an open line somewhere, I can test these wires by just maybe undoing one of these right here. Then I can test it basically from here to there to see if there's any issues. And if I don't have any issues there, I'm going to test it from here to here to see if I have any issues there. And if I don't have any issues there, I'm going to test for continuity between here and here, just to see if I can get it narrowed down to exactly what cable it is that's giving me problems. Now, if you don't have a voltmeter, again, don't worry. You can probably troubleshoot 75% of your issues without a voltmeter. Again, just taking off the lid, making sure all your connections are good. You can even take off the side if you need to. Go to input 2 on your control panel. And then as you lift up and down on the spring, you should see it flash back and forth between OK and PR. And then also, in a very extreme situation, just watch as chicken's cooking to make sure that the pin is actually lifting up and down to make sure that the lower pin inside the lid cavity is actually working. If you do those things, that should solve most of your issues when it comes to the E84 error code.